Ali, hop. I think I must have been about 6 years old when I first realized that something horrible had happened in my family. I remember I wanted to talk to my daddy, and I went to speak to him, and he explained to me, and he told me about what happened in his family, and also he told me that my mother had lost all her family in the war.
One of the reasons why I didn't like Sweden from the beginning was there were too many Nazis there. There was Karl Gerhard, who was against the Nazis, and some of his shows were not even allowed to be shown because they were against the Nazis. So it was very much, for me, very much German in a way. And that has made a big impression on me when I came. Such a big impression that I could never feel at home there. I don't blame the Swedes, but when I came, it wasn't pleasant.
I felt Jewish. I didn't really know what it was, but I felt Jewish because of what had happened to my family, I think, very much. I started feeling different when I started school, because I had a different upbringing. I had a more German upbringing, and we had different habits, different food, different way of family life, and all this made me feel different to the children in my class. I was born and raised in Sweden. I lived for a long time in Australia and in Israel too, but now I live in France. After 30 years, my father left Sweden as well. Before this, we hadn't talked much about what happened during the war. So when Daddy's letter arrived, I got to learn for the first time how the family had managed to escape from the Nazis in Norway, and felt I would find the bits that had always been missing from my life.
I remember sitting in a car not far from the street where we lived in Hamburg. That terrible night, now known as the Crystal Night. I saw hordes of Nazis in civilian clothes breaking shop windows and vandalizing shops owned by Jews. Synagogues were set on fire, and tens of thousands of Jews were taken to concentration camps. It was the night of the 9th of November, 1938. When violence against Jews started to seriously escalate. I was just 17 and my cousin Gert was 15 when we prepared a quick escape from Germany. Just 2 days after the Crystal Night, we managed to get ourselves on a boat from Hamburg to Norway. My father, like the other Jews, had had his business confiscated by the Germans 6 months earlier. He had to find a way out, and the answer was in Norway, where he and his brother had previously managed to get into. Despite the Norwegian border being closed, my brother, mother and sister all managed to get into Norway in different ways. In the spring of 1939 we moved to an apartment at 123 Kirkeveien in Oslo, and we could finally start living a family life again.
As my father and me had no visa in Norway, we had to buy a kind of ticket at the community to be able to make business.
I worked with my father and his brother, whose family had also made it into Norway. But it wasn't all work. Some of my best memories from those days are of skiing in the winters, which was completely new to me. We particularly enjoyed trekking in the mountains with friends. One of them was a girl who became my first real love. We were neighbours and spent a lot of time together. Her name was Raquel Feinberg, but we called her Lillemor. After everything that had happened in Germany, we started to feel quite secure in Norway. So it was a shock when the Germans suddenly attacked. It was on the 9th of April 1940 and marked the beginning of the German occupation. Initially, we didn't, as Jews, feel particularly threatened by the Nazis, even though Norway was now run by the Norwegian National Unity Party, headed by the Norwegian Nazi Quisling. But in the beginning of 1942, things started happening. All Norwegian Jews were forced to fill in a form, and a J was to be stamped in our passports. Our family realized that we were no longer safe, and we all wrote a different address to the one where we actually lived. On the 26th of October 1942, the Nazis began arresting the Norwegian Jews. To start with, only the men were detained. My grandma got to know about this before the rest of the family and hastened to warn us. We realized right away that we could no longer stay at our home, and hid at the home of one of my parents' friends, called Alice. A few weeks later, we discovered that the Nazis were looking for us. And on the 17th of November, the doorbell rang. My brother and I ran and hid immediately. We could hear a policeman asking our mother where we were, and her saying we were away. We then heard our father, who had also been hiding, sounding very upset, declaring that as a former German officer who'd taken part in the First World War, I shouldn't need to hide. But they took him away there and then. Hans and I remained in our hiding place. Next day, the police came back and told our mother that they'd shoot my father unless we, Hans and I that is, didn't hand ourselves over within 24 hours. Now we didn't have any choice but to turn ourselves in. We were arrested on the spot and taken to a prison camp called Bredtveit. We were put in a special barracks reserved only for Jews. Following our arrest, our mother did everything she could to get us released. One day she left her hiding place and in pure desperation set out to find Finn Støren, Quisling's right hand. Finally, late at night, she found Støren's house and could at last make her plea. She claimed that they'd made a terrible mistake by arresting a German officer and his sons. She produced documents as proof of his identity and had brought along his medals from the First World War. Støren showed signs of uncertainty, but wanted to check what he should do with Germany. Then everything started to happen quickly, and they began arresting women and children as well. When we'd been in Bredtveit a week, we were ordered to pack our things and then transported to the port in lorries. When we arrived, there was already a big crowd there. Soon, there were more than 500 of us.
My father lost his face totally and was very down. And my brother and I naturally also followed. So we came to the harbor, and there was a boat called Donau. And they called us up after the ABC.
What happened will be forever etched in my memory and in my senses. Every second of it. It's there within me. It doesn't scare me, but it's always there, ready to be brought to the surface.
I said to my father, we are never going to go up. Take it easy. And he was so angry at me because he was nervous. You can't believe how nervous he was. So he slapped me in my face and said, you bloody optimist. That's impossible. And then the name Hans Levy came, and Kurt Levy. And halfway up, we were stopped, and they said, Arnold Levy stays. And my father said, I'm not staying without my sons. So if they leave, I also leave. After a little while, they said we should come down. And we were taken into the car where the director of the concentration camp was driving back.
No one knew it then, but all those on board the Donau were on their way to a certain death in Auschwitz. Only 9 of them survived.